Some field workers were working in an almond orchard approximately a mile from Highway 99. They came across a dead female. She was found curled up in a somewhat fetal position, and they called the sheriff's office in Kern County, who responded.
When the homicide detectives arrived on scene, and they examined the young lady, they noticed that some of the facial features led them to believe that she may be Native American.
The victim was about 35 years of age, fully dressed in a pink top, blue jeans, and white, very clean sneakers. The front of her top was completely saturated in blood.
I had never seen a victim that was stabbed that many times. This was not an accident. The suspect meant to kill our victim. In examining the scene, the detectives saw that there were tire tracks, but there was no other footprints. So the investigators theorized that the young lady was killed elsewhere. It's commonly referred to as a body dump.
She had no identification, she had no jewelry, she had no purse.
When you don't know the name of a victim, completely unidentified Jane Doe, you're not sure where to look for witnesses. It's very difficult trying to track those leads down. At the coroner's office, the coroner stated that it appeared the victim had been raped. Swabs were taken of the semen for collection as evidence.
She also had 2 tattoos. These were the most prevalent identifying marks that she had on her. She had one tattoo that was a rose. Above it said mother, and below it said, I love you. And then she had a second tattoo that was a heart that had the name Shirley in it. Above it said, love you, and below that said Seattle.
Janitors at Westlake High School received a call of a mannequin lying in the parking lot. They got closer and realized it was a young woman, partially disrobed, obvious stab wounds in her upper body. Her shoes were tossed up on the hillside. Bloody drag marks were seen in the parking lot. She had been brought there in a car and drug up on the hillside where she was found.
A second woman has been found dead, murdered the same way as the Jane Doe victim in Kern County.
She had on a light-colored top that was soaked in blood.
It was very evident that she had put up a fight. She had defensive wounds on her arms and her hands. She had been raped.
She had no identification. She had no jewelry.
Until she's identified, this victim will be referred to as Jane Doe Ventura.
When they did the autopsy, they learned that she had been stabbed approximately 29 times.
In 2011, I had retired from the sheriff's department and was in the process of being rehired by the district attorney's cold case unit.
Almost immediately, investigator Steve Rhodes takes over the Ventura Jane Doe cold case.
DNA evidence that had been collected in 1980 from the rape kit and from the victim's clothing was submitted to CODIS for analysis using the newer DNA techniques. The Department of Justice informed us that there was a CODIS match. They got a DNA hit on the rape kit from Jane Doe Ventura.
Finally, after more than 30 years, we had a match for a suspect.
That DNA match was to a convicted felon named Wilson Schuest.
Wilson Schuest is locked away behind bars in state prison, serving a life sentence for a string of sexual assaults.
And they also learned that there was a previous CODIS hit for Wilson Shoe West to a Jane Doe in Kern County.
We called the Kern County Sheriff's Department and learned that Wilson Shoe West is a white male who was born and raised in Louisiana. He was kicked out of the Army due to drug abuse and settled in Los Angeles.
It turned out Wilson Shoe West was a serial rapist.
He was arrested in '77 for the kidnapping and rape of a young woman who he had left for dead. For that crime, he was sentenced to 2 years in state prison.
So in June of 1980, Wilson Shoe West gets paroled, and he moves up to Kings County. He's only out for approximately 3 months.
Shoe West was in the area right around the time of the Jane Doe murders. DNA shows that Shoe West had sex with both victims. Investigators know that doesn't necessarily make him a killer, even with his record of sexual assault.
You never had sex with her? I don't know her.
So there's no way your DNA is going to be in this girl's clothing?
No.
In this case, the lie is as good as the truth. I asked him if he would voluntarily give us his DNA sample, and he allowed us to collect a DNA sample.
But Rhodes doesn't want to take any chances. He's looking for more evidence.
Steve Rhodes called Kern County Sheriff's Department. He gets their case file, and he notes that Kern County detectives did interview Wilson in 2008. During his interview, Wilson mentions that he's living with a family called the Bells for approximately 1 month during the time period when the two victims were found murdered. Steve realized that Kern County detectives had never actually tried to track down the Bell family.
I started scouring phone books on the internet and ultimately landed on a small town in Oklahoma. I called the Oklahoma Police Department in this small town.
An Ardmore, Oklahoma detective heads to the address Rhodes provides.
The detective knocks on the door and says, "Do you remember a subject named Wilson Shoe West?" It's 33 years later. And her eyes light up and she's like, "Have I got a story for you?"
I got very excited. So shortly after our phone conversation, my partner and I met with Mrs. Bell and her youngest son, Scott.
Scott says, "Is it because of that woman he killed in Bakersfield?"
Scott told us that Shoe West had said he had picked up some broad in a bar, took her out to the country, and killed her.
Shoe West told Scott that he then dumped her body in the middle of nowhere.
It all came together. This has to be Jane Doe Kern.
At his hearing, Shoe West pleads not guilty. In July 2018, 38 years after the killings, Shoe West is found guilty of the murders of the Ventura and Kern County Jane Does.
He was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life without the possibility of parole. But we still wanted to know the identity of these victims. We decided to do something I've never done before or since. We went to Wilson to see if he would tell us.
And he told me that he picked up Jane Doe Kern County at a bar in Hanford. He didn't know who she was. I asked him where he got Jane Doe Ventura County from, and he told me he found her hitchhiking in Visalia. I felt it was important to find out who these women were. And I'm sure there's some family out there that are wondering, where did she go? I want to answer that question.
In 2020, February, I was at a women's conference. I just, for once, thought, okay, I'm going to share. And I said, my Auntie Shirley's been missing since 1979.
A few days later, one of the women emails her.
She said, look on Facebook. And there was that picture that I seen, the one that they call Becky Ochoa. And I'm like, oh my God. And I said, I know it's her. I know it is her. And then when I seen the tattoos, I couldn't believe it. The person from Jane Doe Project asked me to upload my DNA. She said, it's her. I cried, I laughed. I mean, it was just crazy, a lot of emotions. Yeah.
When I heard that we had identified Shirley, I felt so good for Violet. But we're still trying to identify Jane Doe, Ventura County. With the DNA Doe Project, we have traced her family line out of Guatemala and into New Mexico. And it's starting to look like she might have ties to the Los Angeles area. I believe we're very close to finding out who she is. To give back her name, it just ends a pledge that I had made to all my victims. I'm going to do my best to seek justice for you. And that's my service to my community.